So thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today. It's just a quick train ride down from Tilburg to present on equity and inclusion in the sciences, something that's really important to me. I think it's going to work. Give it a second. And my organization, 500 Women Scientists, that I co-founded about 2.5 years ago. So this is what a scientist looks like. Kind of keep that in mind throughout this presentation, because representation is such a key foundation and ingredient to ensure that people from all walks of life see themselves reflected back in science. So if you don't see yourself in the leadership of science, why would you think it could be a place for you? Is this too loud? So I want to make a case for why bringing our full selves to science can make science better. But not all individuals have the opportunity to bring their full selves to science. So this already has been talked about today. Obviously, we have a problem. 47% of our workforce around the globe are women, but 28% of the workforce in STEM are women. So there's this big gap, and there have been a number of campaigns and ideas to address this gap. How can we get more women into science? But unfortunately, a lot of the work hasn't really been based in the evidence. And as scientists, we know that the evidence is there. How can we really address the problems, the challenges that we see with real solutions using evidence? And so this, again, you already showed this. I don't need to show any of my slides, apparently. This leaky pipeline of women leaving the STEM fields, and depending on which country you're in, the gap can be bigger, but overall, across the world, this is a consistent pattern. So we know what is happening, but why is this happening? Why are women leaving science at a consistent rate across the world? And this is because issues for why are built into the institution of science. Often you may hear people say, the institution of science is broken. It doesn't support women. What I've come to think and realize and believe is that the institution of science is working exactly as it was designed to work. It supports the people that it thought should be in science, and those are the people that succeed the most, and we have this gap. So if we want to come up with solutions, enact those solutions, close the gender gap, then we really need to address this fact and change the foundation of science. So institutional discrimination is really built into that foundation. And a lot of these topics you can see in your great cartoons that you all are sharing, these gender norms, unequal pay for equal work, inadequate family leave policies, and flexible work schedules, and workplace harassment. So all of these things have become norms in our scientific institutions, and so we can easily look away and say, well, it didn't affect me today, so I'm not going to take a stand. But we know that this is a major problem across all career stages for women. Early on, girls are discouraged from pursuing science because, hey, you're not good at math, or maybe science just isn't for you. You should just go over here into this field. Overt and unconscious gender biases continue to affect women from the undergraduates all the way through to upper levels. Female students are perceived to be less knowledgeable. And then as you become farther along in your career, you're less likely to have mentors as a woman, and men are less likely to bring you into the lab. Women and underrepresented minorities are also less likely to receive awards, publications, they're judged more harshly, and in the classroom, women of color have their authority and competency challenged over and over. So repeated research highlights now that biases against women who identify as lesbian, bisexual, and transgender are particularly strong in STEM fields. So these are a long list of problems, and you could keep going down with this list, right? So right now I want to zoom into this workplace harassment because I think it's something really relevant for our time. What is sexual harassment? Harassment is a real and sustained negative impacts on women, but we haven't started to address it in academia. Last year at this same time, so about just 1 year ago, the National Academies for Science released a report on sexual harassment in the sciences, and it was focused on America, but the findings that they released in the report are really relevant around the world. And it's a really heavy report. If you haven't read it or used it as a reference, I highly recommend picking it up or downloading it. So what is sexual harassment? We tend to think that this is a figure from the report. We tend to think of sexual harassment as this really, like, in the media types of harassment. This is the top of the iceberg where we can really see someone was harassed a lawsuit could be brought against them, that person could be fired for the sexual harassment, right? That's what we tend to think of, but the majority of harassment is happening under the surface. And some of it will be implicit bias, other is just gender norms that we've just accepted. We were brought up as children learning this, and it still maintains in our psyche, okay? So an example of this is come-ons. They have little to do with sexual attraction, so it's all under the surface. They're motivated by the desire to devalue women or punish those who violate gender norms. And these can be very small comments, maybe even disguised by a joke with a smile that we just don't notice. And so the only way we can combat this is first to learn about what sexual harassment is in this entire iceberg, and then start to talk about it in the open. And it can be really uncomfortable. It can create angst and tension, but I think it's really important to start those conversations now, and I think you already have started to do that. So sexual harassment is only one form of harassment. People of color deal with racial harassment, and women of color experience both. Unfortunately, racial harassment has received far less attention, so there's not as much research on the impacts of racial harassment in the workplace. So this is a really big knowledge gap that as you all here moving forward thinking about what you need to address, maybe that's something in the future you can think about addressing. Harassment, discrimination, explicit and implicit biases go well beyond gender and race. They also include homophobia and transphobia, discrimination against those with disabilities, etc. So there's all these many layers to harassment in the workplace, and talking about gender is a great starting point, but it's only the beginning. So one more thing about harassment that's really important, not just is this happening, but victims' health outcomes have been found to be increasingly more distressing when their harassers are more powerful. So, coping with harassment is burdensome. Women may attempt to ignore it, push it off, or seek help in therapy, but overall it has a really detrimental effect on themselves as a person and on their career. But the stark truth is that there's inadequate efforts to bring justice for the victims, just across the board. Maybe in some institutions there are clear guidelines, but even then, it's still left often to the woman to bring it forward, so there's this big disconnect in how we can address these problems. So the challenges that I'm talking about today that I just listed, that you all have been working on this semester, are not new. Women have been struggling in science, or to gain recognition in science, for centuries. And maybe just because 2018 was deemed the Year of the Woman, and likely we've seen this flourish in promotional activities, and like this beautiful cartoon about women in science, there's still a lot of work to do. So I think that's something that I keep in mind is, it's great that we made progress this month, this year, and what else is left to do? So this is where my organization comes in, and we think about how can we continue to enact change. All the work we do has these tenets in mind. To create an inclusive science, we must center the experiences of the most marginalized among us. We must stay committed to justice, confront our own privileges, and remain open to learning and growing in this work. So we can't have one of these without the other. And I think something that's really become important to our organization over the last year is this: center the experiences of the most marginalized among us, because if you're raising those people up, you're raising everyone up. Okay, so that's why my organization formed, or these are the challenges that we're trying to address. I'll just talk a little bit about 500 Women Scientists. Our true origin was in November 2016. I don't know if you know what happened then, maybe? Maybe you know why we formed. So we recognized that there was this growing sense around the world, not just anti-science, but a continued pushback against women, immigrants, minorities, and we thought, as scientists, we wanted to recommit ourselves to the values that we see important to support all of the people in science. So we started a pledge, and these are some of the women who I worked with. This is just us at a scientific conference. We're all scientists, right? I work on soil biodiversity, I work in the greenhouse, I vote in elections with my dog. So we're normal people going about our lives, and when the election happened, we said, you know what, we can't sit back anymore. We're in a position of privilege. We're gonna step forward and try to align our values with our community. And it was an opportunity, right? And we wrote an open letter here, and we do have it in Nederlands as well, and French. So if you want to read it in those languages, you can. And what we found is over just a few months, we thought we were 500 women scientists because our goal was to reach 500 women who supported us with our pledge. Over the weekend, we had 5,000 pledges, and after a few months, we had over 20,000 pledges. So very quickly, our group started to grow. And why do we grow so quickly? Because our values resonated with scientists around the world. This wasn't just a US issue. This was an issue around the world that science is not equitable and just. And how can we make it equitable and just? So over the first year, we evolved from our reactionary beginnings, this is us at the Women's March in 2017, to a broader mission to serve society by making science open, inclusive, and accessible. Our goal was to transform scientific institutions towards a more inclusive and just enterprise. In doing so, we're trying to create a space for scientists from across disciplines to work together, to speak out, and channel their energies towards making a difference. Today, our organization enacts change through over 300 chapters around the world. We partner with like-minded organizations. We work with institutions and universities on these challenges that I've talked about. We assemble resources for individuals to use. And through a lot of our work is actually done on the ground by our local chapters because we recognize that every community will be very different and have different challenges that they want to focus on. And I think that is a strength of our organization. And what you have done here in your Young Academy is to think about what is necessary to improve for Belgium, right? So what is necessary to improve for each institution? And different places will have different needs and goals. And then we can go back and share that information with each other, which is fantastic. So 500 Women Scientists is building capacity for women scientists to become leaders of this movement in partnership with diverse organizations and collaborators. Okay, so how do we enact change? And I'm going to talk about steps we take to enact change, which I'm sharing with you today because I hope you can go home and say, we worked on some of these and we want to continue working on these other parts. One is to be inclusive and intersectional. We want to change stereotypes. We want efforts to be led by women. And we want to be solutions-oriented. So let's start with inclusive and intersectional. With all of our solutions, it's important to use an inclusive and intersectional lens. So what do I mean by that? Intersectional, can I see like hands? Is this a common term that's being used? Yeah, nods, okay, nods are good, yeah. Okay, so right, intersectionality is the acknowledgement that humans are complex and cannot be defined by one identity. Perhaps you identify by your gender, but there are many other identities that we can identify with, and they're overlapping. Race, sexuality, disability, ethnicity, class, age, language, heritage, religion, education, history, and maybe there's many more that I left off that you as an individual identify with, and it makes you who you are as a scientist in the lab, behind your computer, etc. So not only are there different identities that we as individuals can say, that's who I am, I am a woman from the US, right? I am an immigrant in the Netherlands. But at the same time, those different identities can have different levels of oppression, and we need to be aware of that. Because those levels of oppression determines how a person can be their true selves in science. So now going forward, how do we enact change? We have our intersectionality goggles on. We're going to go forward and try to enact change. One thing we really try to focus on is change stereotypes. And I think those cartoons are a great way to poke fun at the stereotypes that are just built in. And so this came out last year. Only 3 in 10 children asked to draw a scientist drew a woman, but that's more than ever. So the stereotype that when someone says scientist, that we automatically think of a man. It's okay that that happens. Now the step is to say, okay, acknowledge that we have these implicit biases built in, and how can we change that? One way we're doing that is putting an end to manels, as we say, so all male panels. And we've created a platform. Is that? Sorry, I didn't wait for the joke. I'm not a comedian. All male panels are called manels, yeah. So, and this happens quite frequently. Maybe you've been to a conference recently where you looked up and you're like, man, there are a lot of men in the panel. Or maybe you've read a newspaper article where They interview scientists, and every single one is a man because they couldn't find a woman. They quote unquote couldn't find a woman to interview. We're trying to change that because there are women scientists to have on panels, to be interviewed, to give talks, right, at a here today. And so we have created a database, Request a Woman Scientist. We published this in PLOS Biology just this year. Since this date, we have over 10,000 members in the database. And now we're working on trying to improve the database and track who's using this information. We really want journalists to use this information. We also want other scientists to use this information. So educators, policymakers, etc. So that's what we're starting to track, who's using it, mostly so far as members of the media. But I'd really love to see more scientists using this when they're creating a workshop or a panel, that they see, oh, there are women in science in this discipline, I'm going to find them and invite them. And something I was talking about earlier is that we maybe find their names, but we have to remember, only 28% of the workforce are women in science, right? So when you ask a woman, what are the chances that she's probably been asked for 7 other conferences at the same time? Pretty high, because she's in, she is being asked a lot because there's not very many of her. So think about that. So you have to keep trying. Don't keep asking the same person if they're busy, but keep looking for people. It's very difficult and time consuming sometimes, and it can feel frustrating, but know that is the sticking point. And once you get over that and you have more voices of diversity in the room, it'll really be worth it. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is women leading this movement. And that's really important to us because when women are leading, they can really pinpoint what solutions need to happen. Something that's we've been working on is editing Wikipedia. So already Marie Curie was brought up. Something that blows my mind is that Marie Curie didn't initially have her own Wikipedia page. She had to share it with her husband until a Wikipedian came along and created one for her. So that's pretty nuts. The gender gap definitely persists on Wikipedia, which is the 5th most popular website, getting 32 million views a day, and increasingly it is being used for education. This is a huge place where education is coming from. Only 17% of the biographies on Wikipedia are women. And part of this is because only 10% of the editors are women. So people creating Wikipedia pages are women. And so there are some major challenges in Wikipedia because it is built like social media. There are challenges that we need to address, but one way we've started to do that is to create and edit Wikipedia pages. So if you're looking to maximize impact, this is a great way to start. This is Jess Wade. She's a physicist in the UK from Imperial College, and she has been leading the charge on this, creating sometimes 1 Wikipedia page a day, so up to 270 last year. But it's not up to Jess alone. We set up Wikipedia edit-a-thons with our network, but you can do this within your own institution. They're really fun. You can hire someone or bring someone in from Wikipedia to teach you how to edit. So what we've done is on one day for Ada Lovelace Day, 69 pages were created, 407 articles were edited, and importantly, since then, 3.6 million views of these articles have happened. So you can have a really big impact just in one day, a few hours of editing pages, and it can feel like you're really doing something. One of the challenges with Wikipedia, and not just Wikipedia alone, it's when hiring, when saying, this woman, is she qualified or not? Well, we don't know, is this idea of notability. In Wikipedia, notability can be scientific publications, awards and recognition, press coverage, right? So the same thing on a CV that we're judging and hiring scientists on is true on Wikipedia. The problem is if we go back to the beginning of my talk, women are cited less frequently, they're often not receiving awards and recognition for their work, and they're not getting as much press coverage. So because of this discrepancy, when you go to make a Wikipedia page, it can become more difficult to have these quote-unquote notability factors. And because Wikipedia tends to be a bit of a social media dumpster fire sometimes, is the best way to call it, there are trolls there. So when women receive, so for example, Jess made a page for Clarice Phelps. She's the first Black woman to help discover an element, which is fantastic. But she was only listed in the acknowledgements, which is, again, she wasn't receiving enough credit for what she was part of. the trolls went in and took her Wikipedia page down and said she doesn't get to have a page. So there's like this internal balance, and I think we as scientists, even if you're not on the inside of Wikipedia, you can look and recognize the issue here and say, how can we improve this? How can we get more awards, more recognition for women in science for the work they're doing so this isn't a problem in the future? Yeah, so in every one of those spaces, women are underrepresented, and we know from extensive research that this is a systemic problem. They're cited less, receive fewer grants, and they're judged more harshly. So in addition to having Wikiathons, we've launched initiatives to give women more opportunities to become notable in Wikipedia's eyes and notable elsewhere. And so this is a solution that you could also think about enacting in your own way. What we've done for our organization first is we've developed the Fellowship for the Future. This is a fellowship designed to support women of color leading in STEM. And so we're going to pay women of color for the work that they're doing with social justice. So not only will they have a fellowship that they can put on their CV, they'll be getting paid for their work, which is really important. When you ask people to do work for you, whether it's with science or especially with diversity and inclusion, you should be giving them something for their work, right? That's a hard concept, I think, to wrap around, because often we've taken advantage, myself included, of free resources out there. Something I've started doing is looking for people on Twitter who I follow, who I help educate myself. Maybe they've written a long piece or a book, but I use Twitter, find these people, find the information, and then you can PayPal or Venmo them. Venmo's American. You can PayPal them for their services, right? So it's even individuals you can reward for the work that they're putting in. Another activity we're working on is called the SciMom Journey, and this is bringing visibility to the challenges mothers in science face when starting or building their family and giving them a platform to share their stories. We have a whole series in Scientific American if you're interested, and this is something that's important to your organization. So I want to end with actions and solutions. Actions we can take as an individual, in your lab, and at your institution. So as an individual, this can be as easy as using your pronouns in an email, on your email signature or in your Twitter handle. You can read and educate yourself, and you can connect with communities outside of your own. In your lab, you can create best practice guidelines that you share at your lab meeting, creating a safe space for anyone from different backgrounds. You can also create reading lists, not only on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but maybe something on decolonizing science. Finally, at your institution, you can help create better codes of conduct, join boards, talk to HR, create large-scale educational campaigns. So a lot like you all have been working on. So the things I keep in mind is education. We love education, we're scientists. This is something that we get to keep educating ourselves on. Start a 500 Women Scientists pod. Have uncomfortable confrontations and conversations. They won't be as bad as you think they will be. And if you're in a place of power, step up. So with that, thank you for listening and stay in touch.